When truth appears before others are ready to see, it begins with a quiet but powerful recognition that many chosen ones know all too well. There are moments in life when you sense something deeply before anyone else does. It may come as an inner knowing, a subtle awareness that something in a situation is not aligning with what people are saying on the surface. At first, the feeling is difficult to explain. You may notice patterns that others overlook, contradictions that people ignore, or emotional signals that seem invisible to everyone around you. Yet when you try to express these observations, the response you receive is rarely understanding. Instead, people laugh, dismiss your concerns, or tell you that you are thinking too much. Some even go further, suggesting that your perspective is unrealistic, or that you are imagining problems that do not exist. For a time, this reaction can make you question your own instincts. When enough voices around you insist that you are wrong, doubt naturally begins creeping into your thoughts. You start wondering if perhaps you truly misunderstood the situation, if maybe the others are right, and you simply misread the signs. Yet even during those moments of uncertainty, something inside you refuses to completely abandon the truth you sensed in the beginning. That quiet inner conviction continues whispering that what you noticed was not imagination, but perception. This introduction speaks directly to that experience. It acknowledges the journey of being the person who saw something clearly before it became obvious to everyone else. It reminds you that throughout history, individuals with heightened awareness and deep intuition have often faced the same reaction from society. When someone recognizes truth earlier than the majority, their insight initially appears strange or exaggerated because others have not yet reached the same understanding. But time has a remarkable way of revealing what was once hidden. Situations evolve, patterns become clearer, and eventually, the same people who once dismissed your perspective begin seeing the reality you recognized from the start. This message is not about proving others wrong or celebrating the moment of being right. Instead, it is about understanding the deeper reason why this experience happens so often in the lives of chosen ones. The ability to perceive truth early is not always comfortable, and it rarely brings immediate validation, but it is a powerful form of awareness that grows stronger each time you learn to trust it. The early intuition that no one took seriously begins long before the moment when the truth finally becomes visible to everyone else, because the first stage of discernment rarely arrives with dramatic proof or loud confirmation. Instead, it appears quietly, almost like a subtle signal moving beneath the surface of ordinary life. You may remember the exact moment when something inside you first shifted, when a conversation, a situation, or a pattern of behavior suddenly felt different from the way it appeared on the outside. Everyone around you seemed comfortable accepting what they were seeing or hearing, yet your mind could not ignore the small details that did not align with the story being presented. Perhaps it was a contradiction in someone's words, a tone that did not match the message, or a sequence of events that felt too carefully arranged to be accidental. At first, these signals might have seemed minor, almost too small to explain clearly. You may have tried to brush them aside, telling yourself that you were probably overthinking the situation. Yet the more you observed, the more those subtle inconsistencies began forming a pattern that your intuition could not ignore. This is the moment when the early intuition of a chosen one begins to awaken, not through dramatic revelation, but through quiet awareness. While others move forward with confidence in the surface explanation, your mind begins connecting pieces that appear unrelated to them. The challenge is that these pieces rarely come together instantly. They arrive gradually, forming an incomplete picture that you can sense but not yet fully prove. When you attempt to express what you are feeling to others during this stage, the reaction is often confusion or dismissal. From their perspective, there is no clear evidence supporting your concerns. They are focused on what is obvious while you are responding to signals that are still developing beneath the surface. As a result, your insight may sound uncertain or speculative when spoken aloud. People might listen politely at first, but the moment you begin describing the patterns you are noticing, they often respond with skepticism. Some might say that you are reading too deeply into things that are perfectly normal. Others might insist that the situation is exactly what it appears to be, and that you are imagining complications that do not exist. This reaction is not always malicious. In many cases, it simply reflects the difference between surface perception and deeper discernment. Most individuals rely primarily on visible evidence before forming conclusions. They feel comfortable trusting what they can see clearly in front of them. But intuition works differently. It recognizes patterns before those patterns become obvious to the majority. It detects emotional and behavioral signals that reveal themselves gradually through time. Because of this difference, the person who perceives something early often stands alone during the initial stage of realization. This loneliness can become one of the most difficult parts of the journey. You may begin questioning whether your intuition is reliable, or whether the collective certainty of others should outweigh the quiet voice inside you. There may be moments when you attempt to silence your instincts simply to restore harmony with the people around you. After all, it is far easier to agree with the group than to continue holding a perspective that no one else understands. Yet every time you attempt to ignore that inner awareness, it tends to return with greater clarity. Something about the situation continues drawing your attention back to the same inconsistencies, the same emotional signals, the same patterns that others seem unwilling to acknowledge. Over time, you begin realizing that this intuition is not simply a passing thought. It is a deeper form of perception guiding your awareness towards something that has not yet revealed itself fully. This realization marks the beginning of an important transformation. Instead of trying to convince everyone around you immediately, you start observing more carefully. You pay closer attention to how people behave when they think no one is watching. You notice how certain explanations change depending on who is asking the questions. You observe the rhythm of events unfolding over days or weeks, recognizing connections that others overlook because they are focused only on individual moments rather than the larger pattern. As this process continues, your understanding of the situation begins expanding beyond the original intuition that first caught your attention. What once felt like a vague sense that something was wrong gradually develops into a clearer picture supported by repeated observations. Yet even as your confidence grows internally, the external environment may still resist your perspective. This stage often creates a unique emotional tension. On one hand, your awareness is strengthening as new pieces of the puzzle reveal themselves. On the other hand, the people around you may remain convinced that everything is perfectly normal. When you attempt to share your insights again, the same responses may appear: disbelief, dismissal, or even amusement at the idea that you see something they do not. It is during this phase that many chosen ones experience a profound test of self-trust. The human mind naturally seeks confirmation from others because shared understanding creates a sense of safety. When everyone agrees on the same explanation, it becomes easier to believe that explanation without questioning it deeply. But when your perception diverges from the majority, you must decide whether to follow the crowd or follow your discernment. This decision is rarely simple. Doubt can appear repeatedly, whispering that perhaps you should abandon your perspective and accept the reassurance of collective opinion. Yet the deeper you listen to your intuition, the more you realize that it does not operate through fear or anxiety. Instead, it speaks through quiet clarity. It does not demand that you convince everyone immediately. It simply encourages you to continue observing, continue reflecting, and continue trusting the awareness that brought your attention to the situation in the first place. As time passes, this awareness often leads you to notice additional layers of truth hidden within the environment around you. Conversations reveal subtle contradictions that confirm your earlier suspicions. Behaviors that once seemed isolated begin forming patterns that are impossible to ignore. Even the people who dismissed your concerns may begin noticing small irregularities themselves, though they may not yet connect them in the same way you do. This stage of the journey teaches an essential lesson about perception and patience. When someone recognizes truth early, their role is not necessarily to prove it instantly, but to remain attentive as reality unfolds. Many individuals believe that being right requires immediate validation, yet in situations like this, the opposite is often true. The deeper the truth, the more time it may require before it becomes visible to everyone else. Your intuition functions as an early signal, a quiet indicator pointing towards something that will reveal itself gradually through unfolding events. Understanding this principle allows you to release the pressure to convince others prematurely. Instead of arguing or defending your perspective constantly, you learn to let time perform the work that explanation alone cannot accomplish. Reality has a remarkable way of clarifying itself when enough moments pass for the hidden patterns to emerge. The early intuition that once seemed impossible to explain eventually becomes easier for others to recognize once those patterns become undeniable. But before that moment arrives, the chosen one must endure the period when their perception exists without widespread confirmation. This stage may feel uncomfortable, yet it is also where inner strength begins forming. Every moment you continue trusting your discernment, despite external doubt, strengthens your ability to rely on your own awareness rather than collective opinion. Over time, this resilience becomes one of the most valuable qualities you possess. Because once you understand that truth does not require immediate agreement to remain true, the pressure to conform to every dominant narrative begins losing its influence over your decisions. And so the journey that began with a quiet intuition no one took seriously gradually evolves into something far more powerful. It becomes the foundation of a mindset capable of seeing beyond appearances, recognizing patterns others overlook, and maintaining clarity even when the environment around you insists that your perception cannot possibly be correct. The period when people called you delusional begins slowly. After that early intuition described earlier refuses to disappear because once you have sensed something that others cannot yet see. The next stage of the journey often becomes far more emotionally demanding than the first. In the beginning, people might have simply dismissed your observations politely or brushed them aside with a quick explanation. But as time passes and you continue holding on to your perception, their reaction can start shifting from mild disbelief into stronger criticism. What once sounded like curiosity may turn into impatience, and what once sounded like skepticism may begin carrying a tone of ridicule. This stage emerges because human beings tend to protect the narratives they have already accepted, especially when those narratives create a sense of comfort or stability in their understanding of the world. When someone introduces a perspective that challenges that stability, the easiest way for others to respond is not by investigating the possibility that the perspective might be correct, but by questioning the credibility of the person who introduced it. This is the moment when the chosen one often begins hearing words like overthinking, paranoia, imagination, or even delusion attached to their insight. These labels can feel especially confusing because you are not speaking from emotional impulse or dramatic speculation. You are responding to patterns you have observed carefully over time. Yet from the outside, those patterns may still appear invisible to the people around you, and invisibility often leads to misunderstanding. The challenge of this stage is not only the skepticism itself, but the emotional pressure it creates inside your mind. When multiple voices around you insist that your perspective is unrealistic, doubt can begin appearing even when your intuition remains strong. You may start replaying conversations in your mind, asking yourself whether you explained your thoughts clearly enough, or whether you missed some obvious detail that others see but you do not. This internal questioning is a natural response to social pressure because human beings are deeply wired to seek agreement within their communities. Agreement creates a sense of belonging, while disagreement can make us feel isolated or misunderstood. During this period, many chosen ones find themselves standing between two powerful forces: the quiet certainty of their inner awareness and the loud confidence of the collective opinion surrounding them. Navigating that tension requires a level of emotional resilience that most people rarely have to develop. The environment may begin presenting subtle forms of pressure designed to encourage you to abandon your perspective. Some individuals might try reassuring you that everything is fine and that you simply need to relax and stop worrying so much. Others might approach the situation with humor, joking about how dramatic your concerns sound in order to lighten the mood and encourage you to drop the subject entirely. Still others may become more confrontational, insisting that continuing to question the situation is unnecessary and that you should trust the explanation everyone else has accepted. None of these responses necessarily originate from cruelty. In many cases, they reflect discomfort. People often feel uneasy when confronted with ideas that challenge their sense of certainty, especially if accepting those ideas would require them to reevaluate assumptions they previously believed were secure. Labeling someone as mistaken or overly imaginative allows them to maintain their existing perspective without confronting the possibility that the situation may be more complex than they thought. Yet while these reactions may feel frustrating, they also reveal something important about the psychology of perception. When someone recognizes a truth before it becomes widely visible, they naturally appear out of sync with the environment around them. Their insight is operating ahead of the collective awareness of the group. Because of this difference in timing, their words can sound exaggerated or unrealistic, even when they are grounded in genuine observation. History provides countless examples of this phenomenon. Throughout different periods of human development, individuals who recognized patterns early were often dismissed initially simply because their insight arrived before society was ready to understand it. Scientists who challenged established theories, thinkers who questioned dominant beliefs, and observers who warned about future consequences were frequently labeled unrealistic at first. Only after events unfolded did their insight begin receiving recognition. While your situation may not involve scientific discovery or historical transformation, the psychological pattern remains similar. Recognizing something early often places you in a temporary position where your awareness exceeds the collective readiness of the people around you. This stage can feel isolating because the validation that would normally support your perspective has not yet arrived. Instead of confirmation, you receive resistance. Instead of encouragement, you encounter doubt. Yet within this challenging period lies an opportunity for deeper growth. The pressure you experience during this stage forces you to examine the foundation of your perception carefully. Are you responding to genuine patterns, or are you reacting to emotional assumptions? Are your observations supported by consistent signals over time, or are they based on isolated impressions? These questions may arise naturally as you reflect on the situation, and answering them honestly strengthens your ability to distinguish intuition from speculation. The chosen one who survives this stage does not do so by refusing to question themselves entirely. Instead, they engage in thoughtful reflection, while remaining open to the possibility that their awareness may still be valid. This balance between humility and self-trust becomes a powerful skill. It prevents you from becoming rigid or defensive, while also protecting you from abandoning your discernment prematurely. As the days or weeks continue passing, something interesting often begins happening beneath the surface of the social environment. While many individuals continue dismissing your perspective publicly, some may start observing the situation more closely after hearing your concerns repeatedly. They may not admit this curiosity openly, but your persistence plants a subtle question in their minds. Even if they are not ready to accept your interpretation, they may begin paying attention to the same patterns you mentioned earlier. This quiet shift in observation is one of the most important developments during this stage. It means that your insight has begun influencing the awareness of others, even if they have not acknowledged it yet. Meanwhile, you continue navigating the emotional complexity of being labeled unrealistic for noticing something that feels increasingly obvious to you. Each time a new piece of evidence appears supporting your intuition, the contrast between your awareness and the collective disbelief around you becomes more pronounced. Yet rather than reacting with frustration or anger, the path of the chosen one encourages patience. Patience does not mean silence or submission. It means understanding that truth often unfolds gradually rather than instantly. The patterns you recognized early will eventually become visible to others as circumstances evolve. What appears invisible today may become undeniable tomorrow, simply because time allows hidden dynamics to reveal themselves more clearly. During this period, your role is not to convince everyone through forceful argument, but to remain attentive and grounded. You continue observing, continue reflecting, and continue strengthening your ability to trust your discernment even when external confirmation remains absent. This stage may feel uncomfortable, yet it is precisely where the deeper resilience of your mindset begins forming. By enduring the moment when people call you delusional for noticing something they cannot yet see, you develop a form of inner stability that no collective opinion can easily shake in the future. And eventually, as the story continues unfolding beyond this stage, the same voices that once dismissed your perception will begin encountering the reality you recognized long before they were ready to acknowledge it. Why discernment often appears crazy at first begins revealing its deeper meaning once you step back and observe the psychological dynamics that unfold whenever someone perceives a truth earlier than the majority around them. Because the reality is that discernment does not always operate on the same timeline as collective awareness. When a person notices a pattern before it becomes obvious to others, their insight naturally feels unfamiliar to the environment around them. Most individuals rely heavily on visible confirmation before accepting a conclusion. They trust what can be easily explained, demonstrated, or widely agreed upon. But discernment functions differently. It recognizes subtle signals long before those signals evolve into undeniable proof. It detects inconsistencies in behavior, tone, or circumstance that may appear insignificant when viewed individually but become meaningful when connected as part of a larger pattern. Because these signals emerge gradually, the person who perceives them first often struggles to translate that awareness into language others can immediately understand. This is where the misunderstanding begins. When you try to explain your intuition during the early stages, your explanation may sound incomplete to the people listening. You are describing a pattern that is still forming a picture that you can sense clearly but cannot yet present with concrete evidence. To someone who has not observed the same sequence of details, your words may sound speculative or exaggerated. This is why discernment so often appears irrational or dramatic in its earliest expression. The insight itself may be accurate, but the timing of its arrival places it ahead of the evidence that others rely on to confirm their beliefs. In many ways, this situation reflects a fundamental difference between analytical perception and intuitive perception. Analytical thinking typically moves from evidence to conclusion. A person observes clear data, evaluates it logically, and then forms an opinion based on the available facts. Intuitive discernment, however, often moves in the opposite direction. It begins with a subtle internal recognition that something within a situation does not align, and only later does the visible evidence emerge, confirming that recognition. Because of this reversed sequence, intuition can appear mysterious or even questionable to people who rely exclusively on analytical reasoning. They may assume that a conclusion reached without obvious proof must be based on emotion rather than observation. Yet what they do not realize is that intuition frequently gathers information from sources that are difficult to quantify but still meaningful. Human beings constantly communicate through body language, tone timing, and unspoken emotional signals. These elements form an invisible layer of communication beneath the words people speak openly. Individuals with strong discernment often detect these signals instinctively, even when they cannot immediately explain why something feels inconsistent. For example, you might notice that someone's words express reassurance while their behavior suggests caution or hesitation. Another moment might reveal a contradiction between what someone promises and the actions that follow those promises. Over time, these subtle discrepancies accumulate into a pattern that your intuition recognizes before your analytical mind fully understands it. Yet when you attempt to describe this pattern to others, they may focus only on the surface facts rather than the deeper signals you are responding to. They may say that you are imagining connections that do not exist because they are not paying attention to the same emotional or behavioral details you are observing. This difference in perception creates the impression that your insight is irrational, when in reality it is simply operating through a different form of awareness. Throughout history, many individuals who possessed heightened discernment encountered similar reactions when their insights emerged before society was ready to understand them. Thinkers who questioned established beliefs were often dismissed as unrealistic or disruptive because their ideas challenged the assumptions people had grown comfortable accepting. Observers who recognized early signs of change or conflict were sometimes ignored because their warnings arrived before the evidence became undeniable. Only after events unfolded did the clarity of their perception become visible to everyone else. The reason this pattern repeats itself so frequently is not because intuition is unreliable, but because human communities tend to resist information that disrupts their existing sense of stability. When a new perspective suggests that a situation may be more complex or uncertain than previously believed, many individuals instinctively protect their current understanding by rejecting the unfamiliar idea. Labeling the messenger as dramatic or mistaken becomes an easy way to maintain the comfort of the existing narrative. This psychological response explains why discernment often appears crazy during its earliest stage. The problem is not that the insight lacks validity. The problem is that the environment surrounding that insight has not yet experienced the sequence of events necessary to recognize it. Over time, however, reality has a way of revealing what intuition recognized early. Patterns that once seemed invisible begin becoming easier to notice. Contradictions that once appeared minor become too obvious to ignore. The same people who once dismissed your perspective may start observing the situation more carefully themselves, though they may not immediately admit that your earlier insight influenced their attention. This gradual shift illustrates an important principle about truth and timing. Truth does not become valid only when others agree with it. Its validity exists independently of consensus. Yet consensus often arrives later because people need time to see the evidence unfold before their own perception aligns with what someone else recognized earlier. Understanding this principle can transform the way you interpret the reactions you receive during the early stages of discernment. Instead of interpreting skepticism as proof that your perception is incorrect, you begin recognizing it as a natural response to information arriving ahead of its time. This realization does not eliminate the emotional difficulty of standing alone in your awareness, but it provides a framework for understanding why that experience occurs. It reminds you that being misunderstood in the present does not necessarily mean being mistaken in the long run. The challenge for the chosen one during this stage is learning how to hold their insight with patience rather than urgency. There may be a strong temptation to prove your perspective immediately, to gather evidence quickly, or persuade others through argument. Yet forcing recognition rarely produces the clarity you hope to achieve. When people feel pressured to accept a perspective they are not ready to understand, they often respond with greater resistance. True understanding tends to emerge more naturally when individuals arrive at the realization themselves through observation and reflection. This is why many chosen ones eventually learn that their role is not to convince everyone instantly, but to remain attentive as the situation unfolds. As events progress, the patterns you recognized earlier gradually reveal themselves through visible outcomes. The contradiction between appearance and reality becomes easier for others to see because the evidence now exists in front of them. What once seemed like speculation becomes recognized as foresight. Yet by the time this transformation occurs, the most important lesson may no longer be about the situation itself. Instead, it becomes about the growth of your own self-trust. Each experience where your intuition proves accurate strengthens your ability to rely on that awareness in the future. You begin understanding that discernment is not a flaw that makes you overly suspicious or imaginative. It is a skill that allows you to perceive the deeper dynamics within situations long before those dynamics become obvious to everyone else. And while this ability may lead to temporary misunderstanding, it also equips you with a perspective that grows increasingly valuable as the truth continues revealing itself through time. The quiet strength required to stand alone begins revealing itself once the realization described earlier becomes unavoidable, because recognizing truth before others are ready to acknowledge it naturally places you in a position where external validation temporarily disappears. During this stage, the challenge is no longer simply about noticing patterns or trusting your intuition. It becomes about maintaining emotional balance while standing in a space where agreement is absent and misunderstanding is often loud. Human beings are naturally social creatures who draw comfort from shared understanding. When the people around you agree with your perception of reality, it reinforces your confidence and creates a sense of belonging within the group. But when your awareness diverges from the majority, that sense of belonging can feel uncertain. You may find yourself navigating conversations where others dismiss your concerns or respond with confusion. Even individuals who care about you may struggle to understand why you continue holding on to an insight that appears unsupported from their perspective. This environment can create a quiet emotional pressure that builds gradually over time. The pressure does not always come through direct confrontation. Sometimes it appears through subtle signals, such as a change in tone when the topic arises, or an awkward silence when you express your thoughts. Other times it emerges through repeated reassurances that everything is fine and that you should simply stop worrying about the situation altogether. Each of these responses communicates the same underlying message: your perception does not align with the collective narrative the group feels comfortable maintaining. Standing in that position requires a form of inner stability that most people do not develop until they face similar circumstances themselves. At first, you may attempt to bridge the gap between your awareness and the perspective of others by explaining your reasoning carefully. You might describe the patterns you have observed or the details that first captured your attention. Yet despite your efforts to communicate clearly, the response may remain unchanged. People continue interpreting the situation through the framework they have already accepted. This can create a moment of profound reflection where you must decide how to move forward. Do you abandon your perception in order to restore harmony with the group? Or do you continue trusting the awareness that led you to question the situation in the first place? Choosing the second path does not necessarily mean rejecting the opinions of others completely. Instead, it means recognizing that consensus does not always determine truth. There are moments when clarity emerges quietly within the individual long before it becomes visible to the collective environment. During these moments, the chosen one must rely on something deeper than social confirmation. They must rely on the integrity of their observation and the consistency of the patterns they have noticed. This reliance does not appear dramatic or heroic from the outside. It often unfolds quietly through small daily decisions. You decide not to abandon your perspective simply because it lacks immediate support. You continue observing the situation carefully, allowing new information to refine your understanding, rather than dismissing your awareness entirely. Over time, this process begins strengthening your internal confidence in ways that external validation never could. Because the strength you develop during this stage is not based on praise or agreement from others. It is built from your willingness to remain attentive and reflective even when the environment around you encourages conformity. This quiet resilience becomes especially important when doubt appears within your own mind. Standing alone in your perception can occasionally make you question whether maintaining that perspective is worth the emotional effort. You may wonder whether it would be easier to simply accept the dominant narrative and stop challenging the assumptions of the group. Yet each time you return to your observations and reflect on the patterns that first captured your attention, the same clarity reemerges. Something within the situation still does not align with the explanation others have accepted. Recognizing this allows you to understand that standing alone does not mean standing without reason. It simply means standing ahead of a realization that others have not yet reached. As the days or weeks continue unfolding, you begin noticing that this period of isolation carries an unexpected benefit. Without the noise of constant agreement or disagreement from others, your awareness becomes sharper. You start paying closer attention to subtle details that might have gone unnoticed if the environment around you had immediately validated your perspective. Each new observation strengthens the connection between your intuition and your analytical understanding of the situation. The pieces of the puzzle that once felt scattered begin forming a clearer picture. Meanwhile, the reactions of the people around you remain largely unchanged. They continue interpreting events according to the narrative they accepted earlier, unaware that the foundation of that narrative is gradually becoming weaker. This contrast between your growing clarity and their continued certainty highlights one of the most important lessons of this stage. Truth does not always reveal itself through immediate recognition. Often it emerges gradually through the unfolding of events that make earlier assumptions impossible to maintain. By remaining patient during this process, you allow reality to demonstrate what explanation alone could not accomplish. The quiet strength required to stand alone, therefore, becomes more than an emotional challenge. It becomes a form of discipline that prepares you to witness the transformation that follows. Because once enough time has passed, the patterns you recognized earlier will begin revealing themselves to others as well. Conversations will shift subtly as people notice details they overlooked before. Situations will evolve in ways that confirm the inconsistencies you sensed from the beginning. And when that moment arrives, the same environment that once dismissed your perspective may begin reevaluating its assumptions. Yet by the time this shift occurs, your focus may no longer be on proving that you were right. The experience of standing alone will have already taught you something more valuable. It will have shown you that clarity does not depend on agreement, and that patience often reveals truth more effectively than argument. In the end, the quiet strength you developed during this stage becomes one of the most important foundations of your discernment. It allows you to navigate future situations with greater confidence in your ability to observe, reflect, and trust the awareness that guides your understanding, even when the world around you has not yet caught up with what you see. The turning point, when reality begins confirming your insight, begins arriving quietly, almost subtly, after the long period described earlier, when your awareness existed without recognition from the environment around you. For a long time, you carried the weight of seeing something that others could not yet see, trusting patterns that were still invisible to most people, and holding on to a truth that seemed unsupported by the surface of reality. But time has a remarkable way of reshaping perception, because situations do not remain static forever. Events unfold, people reveal themselves through their choices, and the patterns that once appeared subtle gradually begin becoming clearer to everyone watching. The turning point rarely arrives through a dramatic announcement. Instead, it appears through small moments that slowly accumulate into undeniable clarity. A conversation may suddenly expose a contradiction that others had previously overlooked. A decision someone makes may reveal intentions that no longer align with the story they had been telling. An unexpected event may bring hidden dynamics into the open, where they can no longer remain concealed behind explanation or assumption. In these moments, the same individuals who once dismissed your concerns begin experiencing something unusual. They start noticing the same signals you recognized much earlier. At first, the realization may feel uncomfortable because it challenges the certainty they held before. People often prefer stability in their understanding of situations, and acknowledging that they overlooked something important can create a sense of vulnerability. Yet reality does not ask for permission before revealing itself. Once the sequence of events reaches a certain point, the truth begins emerging naturally through observation. The details that once seemed insignificant suddenly appear connected. The inconsistencies that once seemed minor become impossible to ignore. And slowly, almost quietly, the narrative surrounding the situation begins shifting. What once sounded like speculation when you described it now begins sounding like foresight. The environment that once treated your perspective as unrealistic starts reconsidering its assumptions, even if no one openly admits that shift at first. The fascinating aspect of this turning point is that it rarely involves an immediate apology or dramatic acknowledgement that you were right all along. Human pride often makes such direct recognition difficult. Instead, the transformation usually appears through subtle changes in how people speak about the situation. Conversations that once dismissed your perspective begin including questions that resemble the concerns you raised earlier. Individuals who once insisted that everything was perfectly normal may start observing the situation more carefully themselves. They may not reference your earlier insight directly, but their growing curiosity reveals that their perception has begun evolving. This quiet shift marks the beginning of the turning point, where reality begins confirming what intuition recognized earlier. Yet the most powerful transformation during this stage does not occur in the external environment. It occurs within you. After enduring the period of standing alone with your awareness, witnessing reality gradually confirm that awareness creates a unique sense of clarity. It reinforces the understanding that discernment is not something to abandon simply because it lacks immediate validation. Instead, it becomes a reminder that truth often reveals itself through time rather than argument. Many chosen ones discover that this moment of confirmation feels less like victory and more like calm recognition. You do not feel the need to confront those who doubted you or demand acknowledgement for your earlier insight. The journey of observing the situation unfold has already taught you something deeper than the satisfaction of being proven right. It has strengthened your trust in your ability to recognize patterns and interpret the signals hidden beneath appearances. That trust becomes one of the most valuable outcomes of the entire experience. Because once you understand how intuition operates, you stop relying solely on external agreement to confirm your perception. You begin recognizing that awareness often arrives before explanation. This understanding transforms the way you approach future situations. Instead of dismissing your instincts simply because others disagree, you learn to observe patiently and allow time to reveal whether those instincts reflect genuine patterns. The turning point, therefore, becomes more than a moment when reality confirms your earlier perception. It becomes a lesson about the relationship between truth and timing. Truth does not change depending on how many people believe it. It exists independently of opinion, waiting for the right moment to become visible through unfolding events. When that moment arrives, the environment begins adjusting its understanding naturally. Individuals who once felt confident dismissing your concerns may start reflecting on the earlier conversations they had with you. They may remember the details you pointed out and recognize that those details now align with the events unfolding around them. This reflection does not always happen publicly. Often it occurs privately within their own thoughts as they reconsider the situation from a new perspective. Some may even begin approaching you with curiosity, asking questions about how you recognized the pattern so early. Others may simply observe quietly, acknowledging internally that your awareness reached a conclusion before theirs did. Regardless of how each person processes the realization, the environment gradually transitions from disbelief to recognition. The turning point becomes visible not through confrontation, but through the collective shift in perception that begins taking place. The same awareness that once seemed isolated now becomes part of the shared understanding of the group. Yet by the time this transformation occurs, your focus may have already moved beyond the need for validation. The experience of trusting your intuition through uncertainty has already reshaped your mindset. You have learned that clarity can exist even when agreement does not. You have seen how patience allows truth to reveal itself naturally without forcing recognition prematurely. And perhaps most importantly, you have discovered that the real value of discernment lies not in proving others wrong, but in understanding the deeper patterns that shape human behavior and unfolding events. The turning point when reality begins confirming your insight, therefore represents more than the correction of a misunderstanding. It represents the moment when awareness, patience, and observation converge into a powerful form of wisdom. By witnessing this process firsthand, you gain a deeper appreciation for the rhythm through which truth moves within the world. It does not always rush forward dramatically. Often it emerges slowly, revealing itself piece by piece until the picture becomes clear to everyone watching. And when that clarity finally arrives, it reminds you that the quiet voice of intuition you trusted at the beginning was never misplaced. It was simply operating ahead of its time, waiting patiently for the moment when reality would bring its message into the light, where others could finally see what you had recognized from the start. The emotional complexity of being proven. Right begins unfolding after the turning point, described earlier, becomes undeniable because once reality starts confirming what you sensed from the beginning, the experience does not feel as simple as many people imagine. From the outside, others may assume that the moment when your insight is validated must feel triumphant, almost like the conclusion of a long argument where the final evidence proves your perspective correct. Yet the emotional landscape inside that moment is far more nuanced than a simple sense of victory. When you have spent a long period standing alone in your perception, enduring skepticism, and occasionally even ridicule for noticing something others dismissed, the eventual confirmation of that perception rarely produces loud celebration within you. Instead, it often creates a quiet sense of reflection. You remember the earlier conversations when people insisted that your concerns were unrealistic, the moments when doubt crept into your own mind because so many voices around you questioned your awareness, and the long stretch of time when the truth remained hidden beneath appearances. When the situation finally unfolds in a way that confirms what you saw early on, the realization can feel both relieving and strangely sobering at the same time. Relief appears first because the uncertainty that once surrounded your perception dissolves. The patterns you noticed are no longer invisible, and the environment around you begins recognizing the same reality that guided your intuition. Yet alongside that relief often comes a deeper emotional awareness that the process leading to this moment carried consequences. Sometimes the truth that emerges confirms something painful you hoped would never happen. Perhaps the situation involved someone whose intentions you wanted to trust, or a dynamic you wished would remain stable. Being proven right may therefore mean acknowledging that the challenge you anticipated could not be avoided after all. This realization can soften the sense of triumph because it reminds you that discernment is not about predicting events for the sake of validation, but about understanding reality clearly even when that reality is uncomfortable. In many cases, the emotional complexity grows further when you notice how people respond to the unfolding truth. Some individuals may quietly begin acknowledging that your earlier insight was accurate, though they might not express that acknowledgement directly. Others may approach you with curiosity, asking how you recognize the pattern so early. Yet there may also be those who continue avoiding the topic entirely, perhaps because admitting that they dismissed your concerns earlier feels difficult for them. Human pride often resists openly admitting that a previous judgment was mistaken. Observing these reactions can create a mixture of emotions inside you. On one hand, you may feel a sense of calm confidence knowing that the truth revealed itself without the need for confrontation. On the other hand, you may also feel a subtle awareness of how quickly collective opinion can shift when circumstances change. This awareness does not necessarily produce resentment, but it does deepen your understanding of how perception works within social environments. People often form opinions based on the information available to them at a specific moment, and when that information evolves, their interpretation evolves as well. Recognizing this helps you approach the situation with empathy rather than frustration. Instead of focusing on the fact that others once doubted your perspective, you begin appreciating the broader lesson the experience provides. The journey from doubt to confirmation demonstrates the importance of patience in the process of truth revealing itself. If you had tried to force recognition earlier through arguments or confrontation, the resistance from others might have grown stronger. But by allowing events to unfold naturally, you created space for reality to speak through its own sequence of developments. This realization often leads to a deeper sense of humility as well. Being proven right does not necessarily mean that you possess perfect insight in every situation. Instead, it highlights the value of remaining attentive to patterns and signals while also staying open to continuous learning. Discernment becomes less about asserting certainty and more about observing carefully as circumstances evolve. This mindset protects you from becoming rigid or defensive about your perceptions. It reminds you that intuition and reflection must work together in order to produce true understanding. As you continue reflecting on the journey that brought you to this moment, another emotional layer may appear. The experience of standing alone with your awareness for an extended period often strengthens your sense of independence. During the earlier stages of the situation, you learned how to trust your perception without relying entirely on agreement from others. That self-trust does not disappear once the truth becomes visible. Instead, it becomes an enduring part of your mindset. You realize that the ability to remain grounded in your awareness, even when external confirmation is absent, is one of the most valuable skills you have developed. The confirmation of your insight, therefore, feels less like the end of a conflict and more like the completion of a lesson. The lesson taught you how to listen carefully to your intuition, while also maintaining patience during the time required for reality to unfold. It showed you how quickly collective opinion can form and how easily it can shift when circumstances change. And perhaps most importantly, it revealed that discernment is not about convincing others instantly, but about recognizing patterns that eventually reveal themselves through the unfolding of events. When you view the situation through this lens, the emotional complexity of being proven right begins transforming into something more balanced. Instead of feeling the urge to remind others that you recognized the truth earlier, you may feel a quiet sense of gratitude for the clarity that emerged through time. Gratitude for the intuition that guided your awareness, gratitude for the patience that allowed the situation to unfold without unnecessary conflict, and gratitude for the deeper understanding you gained about how perception and reality interact. This balanced perspective allows you to move forward without carrying resentment toward those who doubted you. Their skepticism was part of the process that shaped your growth. Without that resistance, you might not have developed the same level of confidence in your discernment. And so the moment of being proven right becomes less about validation and more about transformation. It marks the point where your relationship with truth evolves from seeking agreement to understanding timing. You begin recognizing that awareness often arrives before recognition, and that patience is the bridge connecting those two stages. As this understanding settles within you, the entire experience begins appearing not as a battle between right and wrong, but as a journey through which perception gradually aligns with reality. The emotional complexity that once accompanied the situation fades into a deeper sense of clarity, reminding you that discernment is not a burden, but a quiet strength that grows each time you trust it with patience and humility. The lesson. Hidden in the entire experience begins revealing itself only after the emotional complexity described earlier settles into quiet reflection, because once the events have unfolded, the doubts have passed, and reality has confirmed what your intuition recognized long before others were ready to see it. You eventually reach a moment where the situation stops feeling like a conflict and begins appearing as a teacher. At first, the journey may have seemed like a test of patience, resilience, and self-trust. You noticed something others could not yet see. You endured the stage where your awareness was questioned, and you remained grounded while waiting for reality to reveal the truth through time rather than argument. But when the dust settles and you look back on the entire sequence from beginning to end, a deeper understanding begins forming. The real purpose of the experience was never simply about being right. It was about learning how to trust the quiet intelligence within you, even when external validation was absent. Human beings are often taught from an early age to rely heavily on agreement from others before trusting their own perception. When everyone around us shares the same opinion, it feels safe to accept that opinion as truth. But situations like the one you experienced challenge that habit. They place you in a position where the collective narrative does not align with what your awareness is showing you. In that moment, you face a choice that shapes your growth more than the situation itself. You can either abandon your perception in order to remain comfortable within the group, or you can continue observing patiently while allowing reality to unfold in its own rhythm. Choosing the second path gradually develops a deeper form of self-trust that cannot be built through external reassurance alone. Each time you remain attentive to your intuition, despite temporary misunderstanding, your confidence in that inner guidance becomes stronger. This is one of the most valuable lessons hidden within the entire experience. Discernment is not simply a skill that allows you to recognize patterns earlier than others. It is also a process that teaches you how to navigate uncertainty without losing your balance. During the earlier stages of the journey, the absence of confirmation may have felt uncomfortable. You might have wondered whether holding on to your perception was worth the tension it created in conversations and relationships. Yet the longer you continued observing, the more you realized that intuition does not demand immediate proof in order to remain meaningful. Instead, it functions as a compass that guides your attention toward patterns that will reveal themselves gradually through unfolding events. By the time those patterns become visible to everyone else, you have already learned the deeper lesson of patience. Patience becomes the bridge between awareness and confirmation. Without patience, intuition often leads to frustration, because the mind expects instant recognition from others. But when patience accompanies awareness, the pressure to prove yourself disappears. You no longer feel compelled to argue endlessly in order to defend what you see. Instead, you allow time to perform the work that explanation alone cannot accomplish. This shift transforms the entire experience. What once felt like standing alone in your perception becomes an opportunity to observe reality more carefully than ever before. You notice how people respond when their assumptions are challenged. You observe how quickly narratives change once evidence begins appearing. And through this observation, you gain insight not only into the specific situation, but also into the broader dynamics of human perception. Another lesson hidden within this experience is the realization that truth rarely moves at the same speed as opinion. Opinions form quickly because they rely on limited information and immediate interpretation. Truth, however, often requires time to reveal itself because it emerges through a sequence of events rather than a single moment of explanation. When you recognize this difference, you stop measuring the value of your insight by how quickly others agree with it. Instead, you measure it by how consistently it aligns with the unfolding reality over time. This understanding brings a new level of peace into your awareness. You no longer feel threatened when others question your perception because you understand that their perspective is simply operating on a different timeline. They are interpreting the situation based on the information currently visible to them, while your intuition has already connected signals that will become clearer later. Neither perspective is necessarily malicious, but the timing of the awareness is different. Realizing this helps you approach disagreement with greater patience and compassion. Instead of reacting defensively when people dismiss your insight, you recognize that they are simply responding to the stage of understanding they currently occupy. In time, their perspective may evolve as reality continues revealing its deeper layers. Meanwhile, the most important transformation occurs within your own mindset. By enduring the experience of being misunderstood and later seeing your awareness confirmed, you develop a quiet confidence that no longer depends on collective approval. This confidence does not express itself through arrogance or the need to prove others wrong. Instead, it appears through calm clarity. You learn to listen more closely to the signals that intuition provides, while also remaining open to new information that refines your understanding. Discernment becomes a living process rather than a fixed conclusion. Each situation you encounter becomes another opportunity to observe patterns, reflect carefully, and allow time to reveal the truth hidden beneath appearances. The lesson hidden within the entire experience, therefore, extends far beyond the specific moment when you were proven right. It becomes a guide for how you approach life itself. When new situations arise, you remember that awareness often arrives quietly before evidence becomes obvious. You understand that patience allows truth to emerge without unnecessary conflict. And you carry forward the knowledge that trusting your perception does not require the approval of everyone around you. In fact, some of the most meaningful insights in life appear precisely in those moments when your awareness diverges from the crowd. The courage to remain attentive during those moments is what transforms intuition into wisdom. By the time this realization settles within you, the entire journey begins appearing less like a challenge and more like a gift. The skepticism you faced strengthened your resilience. The time you spent observing deepened your understanding of human behavior, and the eventual confirmation of your insight reinforced the value of trusting the quiet intelligence within you. When you view the experience through this perspective, the earlier stage of doubt no longer feels like something to regret. Instead, it becomes an essential part of the process that refined your awareness and taught you how to move through uncertainty with patience, humility, and clarity. When truth finally speaks for itself, begins emerging once every stage of the journey you experienced settles into a deeper understanding. Because when you look back at everything that unfolded, You realize that the most powerful part of the story was never the moment when others finally recognized that you were right. The real transformation happened within you during the time when no one else could yet see what you saw. At the beginning of the journey, your awareness felt like a quiet signal that stood alone against the louder confidence of collective opinion. People questioned your perspective, dismissed your observations, and sometimes even labeled your insight as unrealistic or exaggerated. In those moments, it would have been easy to silence your intuition and accept the explanation everyone else seemed comfortable believing. Yet something within you refused to abandon the clarity that kept returning each time you observed the situation more closely. That quiet persistence became the foundation of everything that followed. As time unfolded and reality began revealing the patterns you sensed earlier, the environment around you slowly shifted. The same details that once seemed invisible to others gradually became clear through unfolding events. Conversations changed, assumptions softened, and the truth that once existed only within your awareness started appearing in the shared understanding of the group. Yet by the time that transformation occurred, the need for recognition had already lost much of its importance to you. The experience had already taught you something far more valuable than the satisfaction of being proven right. It showed you that truth does not depend on immediate agreement to remain true. It revealed that patience allows reality to demonstrate what explanation alone cannot accomplish. And most importantly, it strengthened your trust in the quiet intelligence within you that notices patterns long before they become obvious to everyone else. This journey reminds you that discernment is not about winning arguments or proving others wrong. It is about developing the courage to listen to your awareness, even when the world around you has not yet caught up with what you see. When you carry that understanding forward, you no longer fear the moments when your perception stands apart from the crowd. Instead, you recognize those moments as invitations to observe more carefully, reflect more deeply, and trust that truth always reveals itself in its own time.